Hi, I'm Mitchell Labiak, property writer at Investors Chronicle, and today I'll be answering your questions on Twitter. So Cook Joe asks, can somebody please help me on how to invest in property? Thanks. Obviously, first and foremost, buying any piece of property, whether that's a house or a flat, that itself is an investment. But I imagine Cook Joe was asking more in the sort of wider sense. So there's two avenues people tend to go down when they invest in property. The first is buy to let. It's a profession, being landlords, that requires obviously knowing your onions with regards to various legislation that can change quite often. It's also a lot more risky than simply buying a property for yourself. The interest rates for properties, if you're letting them out, tend to be higher than those for if you're going to live in it. So if you don't want to take on all that risk, you can, of course, just buy shares in a real estate investment trust or in a house builder. But real estate investment trusts are seen as a more direct kind of investment in property because their values rise and fall depending on the values of the properties that these real estate investment trusts own. Vedders asks, should I buy a house now or wait till next year? Is it wishful thinking house prices will drop anytime soon? So, Vedders, that is a good question. The second part of your question first. Are house prices going to drop anytime soon? The consensus is that they will. Savills is forecasting a 10% drop. Knight Frank is forecasting a 10% drop over the next 2 years, and the likes of Capital Economics and Credit Suisse are predicting a 15% drop. So different people are predicting different sorts of drops, but a drop is at the moment likely to be nailed on. It's worth bearing in mind that these predictions can and do change. So if we take Savills, for example, they were predicting in May that house prices were only going to fall 1% next year. Now they're saying 10%. And the reason for that is that interest rates have gone up dramatically since then. So it's worth bearing in mind that from where we're sitting right now, it looks like house prices will fall next year, but that could all change if the economy does something unexpected and we're left with a different prospect for interest rates. With regards to your second question, should you buy a house right now? That is a tough one to answer. On the one hand, if house prices are falling, then you could get a house for cheaper. On the other hand, if the cost of your interest rate is going up, that can sort of negate the fall in house prices. But if you are able to put in a bigger deposit, you can sort of counteract that. So it all kind of depends on what you can afford and what is right for you, which is very cheesy, but always sound advice. Yaron Shaul asks, what is your thought on REIT stocks? It seems to me they're at a huge risk with the rental and home prices going down and high financing costs. I have many thoughts on REIT stocks. I write about them quite a lot at Investors Chronicle. With regards to your points, though, yes, they are. They are a big risk. Some are bigger risks than others, depending on the sort of properties that they buy and sell, and also on their attitudes towards buying and selling those properties. With regards to rent and prices going down, it does depend on the REIT and the sort of properties that they buy. So, for example, warehouse valuations are going down at a much sharper rate than retail assets or office assets are going down at. But on the other hand, warehouse rents are going up much faster. The reasons for this are complicated and to do with the investor excitement around warehouses because of the rise of online shopping, but the continued need for warehouses because of online shopping, and assets like offices and retail assets are also moving around for different reasons as well. So it's worth bearing in mind that, yes, the REITs are risky, and they are riskier at the moment because of a wider property downturn, but some REITs are more risky than others, and not all of their valuations are falling quite as harshly as others. George PM asks, mortgage rates dropped a decimal of a percentage. They're f***ing with us, aren't they? Why are they doing this? It makes it all the more confusing. Should I buy a house now or rent again? How many years would I have to wait if I don't buy now? So George has asked quite a lot of different questions there, but what I'm getting from George is his frustration around the way in which mortgage rates rise and fall. Generally speaking, mortgage rates are based around the cost of debt. So it's about the risk that the banks are willing to take based on how much they want to lend you. This in turn is based on government debt, which Hermione talked about in her video. The short version is that when the cost of government debt goes up, the interest rates go up in turn, and the cost of government debt tends to be affected by inflation. So these things are all connected, and they can be quite complicated, and as George has pointed out, they can be quite frustrating. A wider understanding of how the economy works can help alleviate that frustration, hopefully. Here asks, London house prices are an absolute myth. How are these real? Fix-up Christmas lights aren't that pretty. So here, personally, I quite like the Christmas lights in London, although I appreciate that probably wasn't really what was underneath your question there. What you're getting at is the fact that, yeah, London house prices, they seem rather inflated, don't they? In one sense, you are completely right. They are very inflated, but a lot of that comes from simple as supply and demand. You know, London is one of the most attractive cities in the world for people to live in. And there's only so many places to live in London. So as a result, a lot of these really desirable districts, you know, your Belgravia and the like, the properties there do go for extortionate amounts. However, you are onto something when you ask whether or not these property prices are real, because there is a genuine concern among transparency campaigners that a lot of overseas investors who hide their identities using sort of various offshore accounts buy up properties in these prime parts of London, and that this helps to push up demand artificially because they're not really using these properties to live in, they're using them to store their wealth. There's been many suggestions by government reports and the likes of Transparency International that these oligarchs are sort of using London property as a legitimate way to store their ill-gotten gains. And this does then end up having the impact of inflating these property prices much higher than they would be were they not being used essentially as a currency to sort of hide laundered money. So on the one hand, yes, property prices in London are expensive because people really want to live there. On the other hand, you do have a point that they are artificially inflated by various nefarious actors. Next question. Michael E. Newton asks, what is the best way to short home prices? Housing index futures aren't liquid. There are REITs and home builders, but they aren't the same. Any better ways? Well, I mean, I would question why you'd want to short home prices. You know, the housing market is a complex thing, and sometimes shorting is being used as a way of sort of saying that you disagree with the company and the way that it operates, rather than simply as a way to make money. However, you also make the point that, yeah, housing is not really very liquid. Shorting works by sort of buying shares and then selling them quite quickly. Housing doesn't transact quickly at all. Anyone who's bought a house will tell you it can take months for a transaction to go through, by which point your sort of short option might have disappeared. You can, of course, buy and sell shares in the REITs and house builders, but as you pointed out yourself, it's not the same really as sort of betting on the housing market. There is a third option, which is property services companies. So these are companies like Savills, Belvoir, Foxtons. These are companies which provide the service of buying and selling homes. And of course, their profits are very much dependent on a healthy housing market, arguably more so even than the house builders, because they're dependent directly on property transactions. So if you are banking on the fact that the housing market is going to slow down, you could short those stocks. But what I would also say about that is that those same companies offer other services as well. Ultimately, Michael sort of answers the question himself. There's not really any easy or straightforward ways of shorting the housing market, but only on Twitter would someone ask how to short the housing market. So there we are. Next question. Ikena says, you see UK rent prices and just maybe Harry Potter living under the stairs wasn't such a bad thing as we earlier imagined. So this is more of a comment than a question, but I did go to quite some lengths as to answering it, and I'm going to have to refer to my notes at least some of the time. Is that okay, John?
That is okay, yeah.
That is okay. Okay, great. So I decided to answer this one in a fun and quite literal way, which is how much would it cost for Harry Potter to rent his cupboard under the stairs? So to answer that question, the first thing we need to answer is, where is Little Whingings? Rooms, of course. So once again, I reckon about £300 to live in a cupboard under the stairs. So actually, £300 a calendar month to live in a calendar under the stairs, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it is such a great choice, to be honest. But, you know, everyone has, of course, got their own standards that they have to live by. So no judgment here.
So you're coming down on the side that Harry had it easy?
I'm not saying he had it easy. I mean, these are quite nice areas, you know, that he's living in. So I don't know. I mean, he was living rent free, presumably, but then of course he is only 11 years old in the first book. So I think it's fair to say he had it quite tough. There you go. House.